This morning, just like any other school day in America, about 50 million students will head out for 100,000 public elementary and secondary schools to be taught by 3.5 million teachers at an annual cost approaching $500 billion. Add students in private schools, pre-primary schools and colleges, plus their teachers, and this morning, more than a quarter of the population of this nation is in classrooms of some kind, going about the business of educating. The business, perhaps, but is there yet a science of educating? That was the question examined by an interactive group of researchers, educators, policymakers, parents and students at Brains Are Us, the Science of Educating, a unique town hall meeting sponsored by the Temple Dynamics of Learning Center.
And I think the task before us is the reinvention of the 21st century schoolhouse to create environments that create more effective brains. We can do this now. We should be investing in this now.
So the question I'd like to ask is, how can we help educators focus on the real findings as opposed to the marketing? I mean, everything is brain-based, right? And so how do we help educators and policymakers speak the same language and learn how to separate the wheat from the chaff? Do we need a kind of scientist seal of approval?
I agree. Let's not get into turf wars if it's cognitive science or psychology or neuroscience. It's a brain. And it's a child who has that brain living in a cultural and social environment. And very little has been focused on the fact that we could potentially improve the child's ability to learn any content by making a better brain. And the analogy that I like, which is a very simple one, is that I pay an awful lot more to get a faster internet connection. And I can do all sorts of different things content-wise because I have it. And that's why I do it. So I don't want to be the child in the class left with dial-up when there are other kids who have, broad bandwidth.
So today's meeting is an example of our practice of outreach and in-reach. In-reach being hearing from you, the educators and the parents, about what your problems are in education so that we can direct our science towards more educationally relevant goals.
We need teachers to help us develop the science and the engineering from the ground up. It's not really about us translating, it's about them giving us ideas.
And the idea is exactly what you're saying, to have a real interaction between educators and scientists, where the educators are influencing the scientists as much as the scientists are influencing the educators. The way Javier talked about it, that's the way it has to go.
That the educators have enormous wealth of information to guide the neuroscientists as well. And this, I think it needs to be looked at more as this two-way street. Just a tangible example from our findings of the girls' brains, particularly the social ones, maturing faster than the boys, which I thought was a great insight running to the educators, and they're like, duh, we've only known that for 100 years now, good way to go, Captain Obvious, kind of thing. That educators knew that already. It wasn't profound at all, but I didn't.
Find an educator as a partner to help you translate the message where it can be practiced and make a difference in the lives of children.
Educators listen to brain researchers, reading researchers, behavior researchers, and they're very powerful and they're very thoughtful and they're brilliant people. But educators somehow need the best thinking brought together and perhaps a clearinghouse where the common ground can be found.
What are the implications for running a school system? What are the implications for every school, for every level of school, and blending it into a system that's connected and makes sense for improving the achievement?
I really believe that ultimately, unless we have clarity at the national, state, and local level in terms of what's important, what do we need to be doing in terms of both the content and also the process, that will fall short.
We have policy made by amateurs. They went to school, and therefore they're expert on the process because they received it. Now, I fly a lot, but I've never walked into the cockpit and tried to fly the plane, even though I feel that I'm a proficient flyer. But I think we've got a problem because everyone in our society has been to school, and therefore they consider themselves somewhat expert.
because I couldn't agree with you more about policy made by opinion and subjective analysis. However, the better we get at data-driven policy making, then I think we see systems change based on something that's more empirical.
And I was wondering from anybody in the panel or any of the neuroscientists here just how important they feel it is for in the teacher preparation programs for this curriculum to be introduced, and at what level and what breadth and what depth.
So I think that neuroscience is a relatively new discipline, and basically it hasn't been integrated into multiple curricula enough. I mean, into the first grade curriculum, second grade curriculum on up. Once you get to teacher education, there is a point at which cognitive development really is brain development. And so it does, of course, make sense to be teaching brain development to teachers, because that's what they're teaching. They're teaching brains inside our children.
Teacher education is my world. I'm a teacher, and I really think that teacher education has a major role to play in the kinds of things we're talking about in educating youngsters. One of the things that our whole intent, as is I think the intent of every teacher in this room, is to enhance student achievement, to ensure that all students are able to function at their optimal capability.
So how do we teach teachers to teach in ways they were not taught so that kids can actually learn? And to me, that's sort of the driving question behind the work that we're doing, is that we're trying to teach teachers to teach in new and different kinds of ways. And I would absolutely argue that teachers do need to understand how people learn in order to teach differently.
And what I find hopeful about the neuroscience is that no matter how old you are, what your circumstances are, that there's hope, that you can be helped. And that's why I think that the work that you're doing here is so exciting. And people need hope.
We're at that, in many cases, at the very first step. But we can already begin to see the steps that are needed from here to take us to where we want to go. But if we don't start walking in that direction, we'll never get there.
The most important thing I think we can do in education, if I had to pick one thing, some reason, I would say it's public science literacy. We've got to get the public on board.
And the other major goal of the Science of Learning Centers is events like today. It's to try to bridge this chasm that we've talked about so often today between the cognitive and learning sciences on the one hand and educational theory and practice on the other. It's going to take events like this for this to happen. This event, with due respect, is not going to change the world. It's going to take many events like this. We've seen something of the depth of the chasm today, but the chasm has to be bridged.
There will be successes and there will be failures, but I think the issues that confront us are so important that we dare not try. So, thank you.